So 973. You can text 84850 and you can watch us on Global Player as well.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's kick off with our first caller. It's Richard in Gateshead. Hello, Richard.
Hi, Ian. Are you okay?
Hi, very well, thank you. What would you like to say?
Hi, Ian. To the panel and yourself, of course. Suella Braverman says this new migration bill is the will of the British people. Well, she's not speaking for me. Is she speaking for you?
Tim Lawson, is your fellow colleague speaking for you?
Well, in this case, yes. The migration bill is a controversial bill. There are a lot of things wrong with it. We put some of those things right when it went through the House of Commons. I'm sure the House of Lords are going to do a lot more to it, and some people in the House of Lords might not want to see it go through at all. But the opinion polls show that people do want the government to get a grip on migration, and this is one part of doing that. It will be a different sort of bill by the end of it. I hope it does go through, but the general thrust, I think, has got the support of the public, and certainly that's what many of my constituents have been telling me when I've been knocking on doors recently.
Because you haven't been the biggest fan of Suella Braverman in the past, it has to be said.
I think that's very unfair, Ian. On what do you base that?
Your questioning offer in the Home Affairs Select Committee.
No, well, that's what a good Select Committee member does, whether they're on your own side or not. I mean, there was that, I think you're referring to my question about when I was role-playing as an African 16-year-old orphan and how would I find a safe and legal route to the UK, and she was perhaps slightly struggling for an answer. But that's what this bill now will help with, because we put amendments in it to make sure the government does produce additional safe and legal routes. And that's really important, because if we're going to clamp down on bogus asylum seekers and on the vile people smugglers who are profiting from bringing them across the channel, we've got to make sure that there are proper safe and legal routes for legitimate asylum seekers to whom we have a duty.
And are the government going to accept these amendments?
Well, they've already accepted them in the in the Commons, and we're going to have more detail and more commitments being teased out in the Lords. I'm absolutely sure. Otherwise, the bill won't go through, and we do need the bill to go through.
Angela.
Does Suella Braverman speak for me? Absolutely not. You won't be surprised.
That's a bombshell.
Yeah. But it's just a shocking bill, and the rhetoric, we've got to stop the small boats. Does anybody believe that anybody wants to see people putting their lives at risk, their children's lives at risk, by climbing into small boats and coming across the ocean?
So you want to stop them as well? What's the problem?
But this doesn't do it. This bill is ineffective. What it will do is people who do come across will be in detention. We don't know for how long. The best thing to do is you speed up the way you deal with asylum claims. If people come from safe countries, you can fast track those, but you have to tackle the gangs who are responsible for people trafficking. And nothing in this bill does that. So, I think the Archbishop of Canterbury hit the nail on the head today. But listening to the debate in the House of Lords today, from across the House, from all sides, there is real concern. This is more rhetoric and not much action, other than to keep Suella Braverman happy. It would be very expensive. You'll have queues and queues of people waiting for decisions to be taken, and that doesn't serve the purpose that the government says it's going to do. So it's not going to work.
Is there anything you would disagree with that,
thanks, Ian. This is just one part of a number of measures that need to be taken.
But we were told a year ago.
We have a problem with people leaving French beaches and getting across the channel in the first place, and the French could do more to stop that, but they won't.
But we've been talking about that for 3 years.
I know, and we are giving more and more money to subsidise the French police force for them to intercept more boats but not arrest the people who then come back the following night with a new boat and try again, which is why the numbers coming across keep reaching record levels. We've got a problem then for those people who come to the UK. It's taking a ridiculously long time to process those claims. Angela is absolutely right that the whole system is broken, needs to be speeded up. And then we've got a third problem in that there are many people who can't then return to where they came from if they've then got a failed asylum claim.
But how many people have been returned with a failed asylum claim?
Not nearly enough.
I think hardly any.
And well, it's not hardly any, but not nearly enough. And what's the reason for that is because the EU countries won't take them back. The French won't do it. They weren't doing that before Brexit actually happened, the number of returns, and there are countries that just won't take them back. Hence the Rwanda scheme, which is part of this as a deterrent, so that if people come across the channel...
It's not a deterrent, it's only a deterrent.
Well, it's not a deterrent because it's not started yet. That's the problem.
But only 200 people a year are going to go through it anyway. That's not a deterrent.
No, it's not 200. It can be many, many hundreds and thousands more than that. But hopefully it won't...
Hundreds of thousands more?
Initially,
Hopefully
the Rwandans have said they'll have space for 200 people at a time and 500 over the course of a year. They are going to take many more than that, and there will be other countries that we need to line up as well. But hopefully it won't be necessary, because the whole point is that it will be a lottery if you end up in a Kent hotel or on a flight to Rwanda, and we know that most people won't want to do that, and we've heard that from the French authorities. Justin Schlossberg.
So, from my perspective, I think this is just a classic example of political showboating. It has historical roots. I'm afraid Labour as well have often used these kinds of trigger-happy immigration policies as a way of trying to shore up their votes, as a way of trying to distract from some of the other major concerns that the public have. I agree with the caller. I think it's a bit of a myth, actually, that the public do really want something done, or at least want something done more than they want something done about the obscene billions of profits being made by energy companies, about the fact that people can't get decent housing anymore, the cost of living crisis. So I think, and I mean, Tim mentioned polling. I mean, opinion polling is extremely problematic. For a start, most of those polls are commissioned by essentially right-wing press, and the questions are designed according to a right-wing press agenda. So I don't think they really do tell us much about what the public think. And
but this is a problem. You can't say this isn't a problem. So surely, therefore, a government of any colour has to try and address it. Now, you can disagree with the measures that they're bringing in this legislation, but, I mean, surely you're not suggesting that it's not a big problem. They should just do nothing about it.
I'm not suggesting that at all, but I think there is alternatives, and there are ways of having a fairer system of controlled immigration. And I do recognise, I'm certain that most people do want some kind of controlled immigration system. This is clearly not it.
Well, what are those ways, though?
Well, we'll come on to that in just a second. Let's hear from Linda first. I mean, I don't know if you want to answer the question, does Suella Braverman speak for you? But from an economic point of view, sort of look at it you're an economist, can you look at it from that viewpoint as well?
Yes, I think one of the challenges in this area is there is no easy solution. So I think generally speaking, everyone agrees that the people smugglers, the small boats, all of that is dangerous, and nobody has an easy solution to it. So global cooperation would help. Europe a few years ago, they ended up subsidizing actually Turkey quite a lot, and it's that coordination across borders when they were getting that influx of immigration. So it's got to be something along those lines. But on the economic impact, one of the challenges in this area is there is a backlash against immigration because of because people are unhappy about processing times and how they see, refugees being treated, and this kind of political debate. So it's actually, I think, it's affecting the way we view immigration, and that does have an economic impact. So having skills-based system to try and get, immigrants to come and support the economy in areas where there are vacancies that can't be filled. All of that is a very important part of our economy. So, my very, abbreviated kind of summary about why illegal immigration is so hard, unless we get a better dialogue on that, I do think there will be negative, economic repercussions.
I'm taking it Suella Braverman doesn't speak for you.
Oh, I would generally say if you ask for if any politician spoke for me, I think the answer generally is probably no.
Apart from Tim.
Oh, yeah, and Angela.
Well, let's just look. We've got a few minutes left on this. Let's look at some potential solutions here, because it is very easy for anybody to say, well, there must be another way of doing it. But in a way, nobody else has come up with another way of doing it, apart from saying, well, there should be more safe routes. And the government seem to be accepting that now.
I don't think it's quite true. If you look, safe routes is one way, One, if people arrive, they should have their claims processed much more quickly, leaving people in limbo for 2 or 3 years in some places. Having unaccompanied children, as they do in this bill, can be held in detention. And of all the children, over 200 children have gone missing and not been found when they've been detained by the government. I think Vernon Coker today speaking said if the state was a sort of single parent, they'd be prosecuted for losing all that many children. It's quite worrying what's happened to those children. And you can also fast-track claims from people who come from safe countries. And therefore you can look at the other claims in more detail and assess those.
But that's what they are doing, isn't it?
Well, they're not, because they told us a year ago that the immigration bill they brought forward was going to address these issues. And now we're here a year later with another bill. It still doesn't address the issue of the traffickers. Unless you break these gangs and break the economic model for these gangs, they're going to still...
You can't do that by legislation. That is for the criminal
authorities to do, absolutely. And more cooperation.
But you said before that there's nothing in this bill. You wouldn't expect there to be anything in a bill.
I would like to see the government... I think you could do things in the bill. I'm sure you could look at ways in legislation to do far more to tackle the gangs. Maybe something around how they advertise, what we're doing on the internet, the dark web. There's all kinds of things you can look at. This bill doesn't even attempt to do it. And it
does.
Well, I don't think... I've not seen...
There's an amendment by the MP for Dover all about clamping down on using social media to advertise getting across the channel, for example. That sort of thing will be clamped down.
Well, let's see if it holds. But in Dover, the government made a great issue of this in Dover. This was going to be the issue they're going to win elections on. And actually, the people in Dover rejected the government's proposals, as we saw across Kent. So the people it was most designed to appeal to, it didn't work. I think you just need to have a number of things. You need to have some compassion to deal with these issues and some proper process and common sense.
Justin?
Bring those together.
I agree, actually, with most of that. I mean, I think most people, although they want a controlled system of immigration, most people in this country understand that there are people that are deserving of asylum, and they do actually hold dear this principle of asylum. So, I mean, I'm not an expert on what the particular alternative solutions are to this problem, but what I do know, what's fairly obvious to me, is that we're not the only country that faces this problem. We're not Spain, Italy, most of southern Europe, France, all these countries face these problems. They're not busy sending people to Rwanda. So there must be other solutions out there. And I'm very, very sceptical and cynical, really, of any claims that there is no alternative.
You need to have countries working together, actually, on this, because it's not just a single problem. If you try to do unilateral action, it can't work. We're far more global. It affects all the countries. We just need to work together a bit better.
Exactly right. So when the Home Affairs Select Committee went to Calais a few months ago, one of the things they said that, first of all, when the government announced the Rwanda scheme, there was a surge of migrants in Calais approaching the French authorities about being able to regularise their position in France because they didn't want the risk of going to Rwanda. The French officials we spoke to were very interested in having a Rwanda-type scheme. I met a bunch of German MPs recently. They want a Rwanda-type scheme. Let's have a Franco-German-British Rwanda-type scheme and act together. Absolutely, I support that. That might just be the deterrent.
I didn't have Rwanda in mind when I was talking about
whatever the
cooperation.
country is, it just so happens that Rwanda is first up. There are other alternatives as well. You have got to have a deterrent to stop people coming across the channel. Whatever you think about the number of asylum seekers we should take, and absolutely we should take asylum seekers, the people who lose out most of all by the bogus asylum seekers and the people smugglers are genuine asylum seekers who get bumped down the queue. Whatever you think about the numbers, paying a people smuggler to come across the busiest shipping lane in the world is the worst possible way to try and get into the UK, which is what this bill is trying to do, something practical.
How much has Rwanda cost so far?
Oh, it's going to cost an awful lot.
How much does it cost so far?
But it's costing us £7 million a day for hotels to put people up at the moment.
And the government's proposing more because it wants to detain more people for longer.
Well, it doesn't want to detain more people. It wants to deter more people coming here.
I'm getting the feeling we could spend the whole of the rest of the hour talking about this, and indeed we could, but we're not going to because we've got lots of other calls as well. Keep your calls coming, 0345 6060 973. It's 17 minutes past 8.
LBC Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale. Tweet at LBC.
8:20 on LBC. Tim Loughton, Angela Smith, Linda Yueh and Justin Schlossberg here answering your questions. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need to call. And if you want to text, you can do so, 84850. And the Alexa way of doing it is just say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. Right, text question from Nina in Chiswick. With the Mirror owner apologising for having once paid a private investigator to follow Prince Harry, is the panel confident that those kinds of practices are now a thing of the past? I have to come to you first on this, Justin. That's your area.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll be honest with you, it's hard for me to be passionately sympathetic about, billionaires, victims of phone hacking. But phone hacking is a serious crime.
Is Prince Harry a billionaire? I don't think he is.
Well, his family certainly is. But it is a serious crime, and it has affected also ordinary people. And it is symptomatic of a deeply corrupt and corrupted press and media system. I think, we heard just today about the documents in the Daniel Morgan case that were found to have been under lock and key during the panel investigation, the last panel investigation, which found the Metropolitan Police deeply corrupt and corrupted in that case. There was supposed to be a public inquiry that was going to get to the bottom of all of this. It was called the Leveson Inquiry. We had part 1 of that inquiry. Part 2 was postponed precisely because there were ongoing police investigations into phone hacking, and the police, we knew already, were up to their necks in some of it. And we were supposed to have part 2 to get to the bottom of the webs of institutional corruption that lay beneath phone hacking. And we didn't, because it was cancelled by the Conservative government. And I'm afraid that decision was backed even by The Guardian, the newspaper that broke the phone hacking story in the first place. So if that's not a reflection...
Why did they back it?
I think they fell into line with Fleet Street. I think it was a cowardly move. I think there was all sorts of pressures behind the scenes. And the truth is, this was about power. And the truth, when power doesn't want the truth out, the truth doesn't get out.
This particular case here, though, is not involving phone hacking. It's about the Mirror paying a private investigator to follow Prince Harry. Now, I'm struggling slightly to work out why that is such a bad thing. If they, for example, thought that Prince Harry was doing some sort of nefarious activity, what is wrong with hiring a private investigator?
Well, firstly, the fundamental principle of journalism that you need to have some kind of prima facie evidence for an allegation before you use methods of subterfuge and invasion of privacy. But secondly, let's be honest, what is the job of private investigators? They don't just follow people up and down the street. They dig the dirt in ways that are, seedy, dark, and very often criminal. We know that from what's came out in the first Leveson inquiry. So to that extent, I do sympathise with him. I think there almost certainly was outrageous invasions of privacy. But it's important to say that this happens also to ordinary people. Millie Dowler's family is the most well known, but there are many, many others.
Angela.
I hope it has changed. But I couldn't say with confidence that it has. And when you speak to people who've either had their phone hacked or they've been followed or been under investigation, it's deeply wounding for them. And I'm not sure people entirely recover from what they think of very private. I've known of cases where people were sort of blaming their friends and family because something they thought was private was made public. It wasn't the end of the world it was made public. It was just something that was personal to them that wasn't for public consumption. And I think we sometimes get confused about what is of public interest and what is in the public interest. I think there are cases where investigative journalism at its very best exposes something in the public interest. Where it is of public interest, like Doreen Lawrence, was investigated, had her phone hacked. What possible justification could there ever have been for that? So I think the distinction has to be what is in the public interest, where that's credible, proper investigative journalism, which I think we would all admire and support, and something that's basically the tittle-tattle, who's sleeping with who said what to who.
Well, that's what we all want to know.
Precisely, but why should you know? You're just the gossip.
Yeah, and?
But I think people are entitled to private lives, isn't it? And it is that of and in public interest. So I admire investigative journalism.
Until it affects you, that you don't really think of this as a big issue. And I'm sure there are a lot of people listening who think, yeah, all of these celebrities, they've all got paid off by Rupert Murdoch or whoever, sort of £1 million here, £1 million there. This doesn't affect me until it does.
And it's hurtful. The fact that somebody's in the public eye. Now, you see these sort of pictures, don't you, of somebody meeting somebody or somebody's somewhere they didn't expect them to be. People's lives can be destroyed through that. So, but investigative journalism at its best is superb. And there's been some great exposés. You go back through time in politics, in different worlds, in business, and that, I think, is entirely justifiable. But the methods have to be legal.
Linda.
I'd agree with that. Just speaking of inadvertently papped, I walked out of the revolving doors here and faced a bank of cameras looking for the Chancellor, and then they perk up, and then they put their cameras down, and I walk on by. But I think it is in this country, the culture around some of this does need some serious re-examining. I think I agree with what's being said in terms of methods, in terms of, public interest. I think about the United States, where I'm from, and there's a big tabloid press. I mean, they make stuff up all the time, apparently. Maybe there are UFOs that have done but my point is, it is still... But my point is, you can have that kind of gossip, that kind of, that kind of tabloidish, that kind of speculation without these methods. And I think that is something in this country that does need to be looked at. The United States, go and pick up any magazine off of, in a store, and you're going to find, all sorts of, somebody said the Kardashians, blah, 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 blah. And, but there's a limit to, and people who pick it up half believe it, half don't. So there is a way of doing gossip, I guess, without, these kinds of methods, which do need to change.
I'm going to say something which will horrify Justin now. I miss the News of the World.
News of the World did some great stories.
It did.
They exposed corruption in cricket and illegal gambling. And that's the truth of it. You're absolutely right. There are lots of these newspapers, and the Mirror as well, they do good journalism. Even the Mail, which is, sacrilegious for someone like me to say, but they do good journalism, but they also produce a diatribe of misogynistic and racist hate speech, as well as using these illegal methods very often criminal methods of investigation, and that just has to end. We are the basket case, not just of Europe, but certainly of the democratic world in terms of how unethical and untrusted our press is.
Tim.
Well, I read the papers a lot, and one of my great luxuries is sitting down on a Sunday morning with a large cup of strong coffee and several newspapers. And I used to read the News of the World. I quite enjoyed the News of the World. But I then sort of gradually work up to the more serious newspapers, so it's a sort of warm-up for me. But robust, dispassionate, investigative journalism is not just desirable, it's essential in a proper democracy. And the scrutiny that comes with responsible journalism of politicians, of other people in positions of responsibility, is a good thing. But I think we've, in too many cases, journalists and big newspaper corporations have transgressed that line, and those shocking revelations that came out, which prompted the Leveson inquiry, I think really did shock people. That ordinary, vulnerable families, the Millie Dowler case, Justin said, and others, were fair game for cheap copy in newspapers. That's indefensible, completely indefensible. In the good old days, you had to have the Home Secretary personally sign off a phone tap, and anybody else who did that without the security services would be prosecuted. So this stuff should have been prosecuted much more rigorously. Gone are the days when journalists hung around in brown trench coats and trilby hats scribbling along. Now there are all sorts of technology methods and private investigators.
But are governments
and that's not journalism.
No,
frankly.
but are governments too scared of the press to really crack down on these type of
practices? I think there's an element of that, and I've been uncomfortable with the failure perhaps to go further. I'm not sure whether Leveson 2 would have done what it was raved up to be, but actually I think we've got to have politicians acting together to say, actually, this is not in the public interest, this has gone too far, but at the same time that's got to be done fully transparently so that politicians aren't trying to hide things. And that's a difficult balance to get. But I'm sure politicians have been, and governments have been, and political parties have been intimidated by what might happen in the press.
But Tim, it's ironic, though, isn't it? Because this government really has acted to stop one case, at least, of, I guess you could call it, well, it was a leak, essentially. And that has resulted in a man who is currently a few miles down the road in a maximum security prison where he's been for 4 years, Julian Assange. So, I mean, there is a moral equivalence here, right?
There are also other reasons Julian Assange is in prison.
That's a whole different scale.
I think the biggest one is that he revealed war crimes, and war crimes in which this government was complicit in. So we can't get away from that truth. That is the reality. We have someone in a maximum security prison without charge where he's been for 4 years for revealing war crimes.
Julian Assange is not your run-of-the-mill investigative journalist, and there's a lot more to that case.
Sure.
So I don't think it helps
that may be
making a case for clamping down on irresponsible and immoral journalism, as we have seen in some cases. And whether it's behind us now, as Andrew says, I don't know. I certainly hope it is, and certainly there's a far more transparency for rooting it out. Okay. And if we do detect it, we need to be far, far firmer in clamping down on it and punishing those people responsible.
If you'd like to ask our panel a question, 0345 6060 973. It's 8:32. Let's get the latest LBC News headlines from Daryl Jackson.
The Immigration Minister has told LBC many of the people crossing the Channel on small boats will place a great burden on the British state. Robert Jenrick has been speaking after the Archbishop of Canterbury described the government's migration bill as morally unacceptable. New York Republican politician George Santos says he'll fight charges of financial fraud, describing the case against him as a witch hunt. The congressman's pleaded not guilty to fraud, money laundering and the theft of public funds. And the UK has scrapped its promise to replace all EU laws by the end of this year. The Business Secretary has revealed fewer than 600 will be revoked by December instead of the 4,000 pledged. LBC weather, showers easing for most this evening, but continuing for Northern Ireland and Northern Scotland, and lows of 4.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:36. If you're thinking of going anywhere, do not, because we've got a cracker of a text question coming up in a few minutes' time. On our panel tonight, we have Dr. Justin Schlossberg, Dr. Linda Yueh, lots of doctors tonight in the house, Baroness Angela Smith and Tim Loughton. Before we go to the next question, Linda, your new book, The Great Crashes, doesn't sound a bundle of laughs, but but it's presumably a warning so it doesn't happen again in the future.
Yes, that's right. That is actually the subtitle. Lessons from global meltdowns and how to prevent them. Yes, it's coming out next week. It's actually economic history. It's about the lessons we should have learned over the past century, and hopefully, it holds individual lessons actually for people to think about, because we will inevitably have another financial crisis. So I think everyone needs to think about: have I piled in? Have I borrowed more than I can afford? And just to make sure that you do pick up some of these lessons. But the overall lesson is we will always have another financial crisis, but we just have to make sure that policies are credible, policymakers have learned, and it doesn't become a meltdown that affects all of our livelihood. Do
you not worry that we're about to have another one with the state of some of the American banks that are teetering on the brink, I'm told?
Yeah, so we are in an American mid-tier banking crisis at the moment. And so, yes, I guess the timing, this is why people don't like Economist. The timing is pretty good for my book. So the parallel I would draw is to the S&L crisis in the 1980s. So I write about 1929, the Great Crash, all the way actually through to the Russia-Ukraine war.
So you haven't covered the South Sea bubble?
No. So it's just the last century. But the parallels to the 1980s, there was a lot of very small savings and loans, and it was just a slow burn series of bankruptcies. Right,
you've talked yourself into an All Talk podcast.
Oh,
so we will do that very, very soon. Right, let's go to, we're going to talk to Angela about, she was at the coronation. There's got a few tales to tell. We'll cover that in a few minutes' time. But let's go to David in Medway. Hello, David.
Hi, Ian.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
I'd like to ask, do you think, given the result of the recent local elections, whether the Lib Dems could mount a credible threat against Labour or the Conservative Party, given their gains are nearly as much in some places as both of the main parties?
That's an interesting point. I think the Liberal Democrats, was it 449 gains they made? Labour was something over 500. The Greens 250, and the Tories lost just over 1,000. And that, in a sense, is the story that hasn't really been given a lot of credence. A lot of people are now talking about a Lib Dem Labour coalition, which I think is slightly previous. But the Lib Dems did, I think, a lot better than many people thought they would, given that they'd made so many gains in these same seats 4 years ago when they were last fought. Angela, let's come to you first. It's interesting, isn't it, that Keir Starmer is just facing question after question about who he's going to go into coalition with, as if there is now very little prospect of a Labour majority.
And he's not answering those questions, is he?
Well, he kind of has. He said he won't go into a coalition with the SNP,
precisely.
but he's shown a bit of ankle to the Lib Dems.
So you said who he's going to coalition with. He's not answering. He's looking to get a majority Labour government, and that's what the aim is. I have to say, election night 2019, I was in utter despair.
You were with me, weren't you?
I wasn't. Not in 2019, unfortunately. Many other elections I have been in. No, I was in Belfast with the opposition, and I was looking. Result after result came in, and you think, can we ever recover from this? This is just so bad for us. And if you'd said to us we'd be where we are now, then I don't think anyone would have believed it. So I think we've done really well in the last two local elections. Most of our seats we were defending this time, so it was quite difficult to win some, but we still managed to, including my husband. My husband won a town council seat in Bognor Regis, which is...
There's a joke there somewhere.
There is there, but you're not going to make it. It was a bit unexpected. But no, I think we're really pleased with how we did in these elections. You do get this every local elections because Lib Dems tend to do better in local elections than in general elections. So, every year you get a question, can they be a credible alternative? They're not going to make that kind of breakthrough. And I think people say to Keir Starmer, do you want a coalition? That's not where he is at all.
Well, nobody's asking if he wants one.
No,
but obviously
you know
doesn't
what I mean.
Want one.
But do the Lib Dems really want to get... No, look, they paid a very high price for propping up the Conservative government before. I don't think they've forgotten that. at all because they've damaged hugely by it. So I can't see them wanting a coalition.
But there's no point in being a political party if you don't want power, surely. And they did actually implement 75% of their manifesto.
It's not just being in power, it is actually what you can do in power. And I think the biggest thing was when the tuition fees, for example, that was their big campaign during the general election, and they gave that up very quickly on. So one of my problems with coalitions...
Like Keir Starmer, eh?
Well, not at all. No, the principles are exactly the same.
Hang on. No.
Exactly
he has gone back on his pledge to abolish tuition fees. That's exactly what the Lib Dems did.
When we go into the election, have the manifesto. When we've got the manifesto, you'll see what we promise into
That's
the
always
government.
a get-out of any
No,
Labour
it's not.
spokesperson.
It
really is.
It isn't. When you see the manifesto, you'll see what we fight the election on. But I think one of the things...
So the 10 pledges that Keir Starmer fought his leadership campaign on, we shouldn't have taken any notice of them because he's ditched the whole lot of them,
the principles that Keir was behind then, he's behind now. And if you look, Keir as Prime Minister, you'll see exactly where we're going to go and what we do. But the more serious point I wanted to make about coalitions is when you had the coalition government before, you had discussions going on behind closed doors. And I think there is a case, if parties don't win outright, they should try and run the country and say to other parties, look, this is our programme, support us where you can, and if you don't want to support us, you ask the country again at some point. We've seen that before. But I'm uncomfortable with debates and discussions behind closed doors where you trade off policies.
I'm going to remember this conversation.
Yeah. If you've ever watched Borgen...
I have.
Yeah, there's a point where they're saying that they all trying to get together. What can we ditch to do a deal with this person?
Yeah, but they in European countries, or a lot of European countries, they actually do the coalition agreement before the election, so the electorate know what they're voting
know what they're voting for. That's a different argument. But we're out.
Or maybe we should televise the coalition negotiations.
No, the whole purpose of the Labour Party, we have clear policies. You're seeing them being shaped now. When we fight the election, we'll be very clear what we want to do. And it's to win an overall majority to deliver on that.
Tim, now your seat became a little bit more marginal at the last election, I believe, didn't it? Are you up against the Lib Dems there?
No, Lib Dems almost lost their deposit.
Oh, did they?
I got the highest share that I've ever got, but it's a two-horse race now. So Labour is very much my challengers, and my majority went up a little bit at the last election, but it's certainly quite a bit down on what it was at the previous election. So, but I've always had actually quite a strange marginal seat anyway. And I've been a target seat initially by Lib Dems, later by UKIP, and then by Labour at the last two elections.
But the Greens next time.
It could be the Greens. The Greens have made some gains as well, but I take all comers.
But what about this threat from the Lib Dems in general in the southeast? Because obviously they seem to be targeting Conservative MPs in East Anglia, the home counties, and the southeast. And they're not quite calling it the decapitation strategy, which they had in 2005, which failed miserably.
Yeah.
But there will be some quite nervous Tory MPs, won't there?
Sure. The Lib Dems had a good night. We had a terrible night. There's no glossing around that one. Actually, the ones proportionally had the best night were the Greens. The Greens increased their number of seats proportionally more than the other.
But lost the one council they controlled where they'd been in power.
No, they won a council in Mid-Suffolk.
But they lost the one they were in power, which was Brighton and Hove, which they had been running it.
That's because they've been absolutely terrible at running it.
Well, I'm next door to Brighton and Hove, and anybody still voted Green after knowing what goes on in Brighton and Hove needs sectioning. I mean, they've been absolutely lousy and
say what you mean.
Ruined Brighton, really ruined Brighton.
I'm going to ask Linda and Justin to be quite brief on this so we can fit in a couple more questions before the end. Linda?
Just very briefly from me, I think local elections give you a flavour of what people are feeling, but I think at national elections, it's got to be a lot more around policies. I love the idea of just making it very clear what the coalition agreement would look like if you went into one, so we can all vote knowing what exactly we're voting for.
Justin?
I think, historically, local elections are quite a poor barometer, actually, of the way that things are going in terms of the general election. But also, I just think I'm afraid that Keir Starmer is going to become increasingly exposed. I think the pledging thing is one thing. I think he's been a less than a nothing opposition on so many really pretty disastrous policies that this government has introduced. I mean, you mentioned the 2019 election. I remember the 2017 election when Labour Party actually won more votes than Tony Blair did in the last
in a bigger population.
And what happened after that was the most colossal and spectacular smear operation that I've ever come across studying the media. And it was a smear operation that I'm afraid that Keir Starmer and much of the shadow cabinet were deeply implicated in. And that's going to be exposed as well.
No, it's rubbish.
In fact, it already has done. I mean, people just have to read the Ford report. They have to watch. They have to watch the Labour files on Al Jazeera. I mean, the evidence is overwhelming.
This is just ridiculous.
I didn't say it's ridiculous, but the evidence is overwhelming.
I'm saying it's ridiculous.
But look at the evidence.
No,
have you watched the Labour files on Al Jazeera?
I've watched some of them. I was there. I was there during this time. And I saw Labour support hemorrhaging from people who did not like a lot of the things that Jeremy Corbyn was saying. So
are you aware that under Keir Starmer, Jewish members of the Labour Party are 33 times more likely to be disciplined for anti-Semitism than non-Jewish members?
The anti-Semitism, I don't care where it comes from, but we have to deal with anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. That's the most important thing.
Are you aware of that kind of evidence?
I'm not going to get into this because I think we've done well on trying to root out, and Keir has been absolutely firm against anti-Semitism from wherever it is from.
But he hasn't.
He has.
He's presided.
No, if you talk to
we're going way off.
Yes.
Can I just? Can I just wrap this up, Justin? I mean, you're clearly a man of the left. What do you do in a general election then? Because you're clearly not a fan of the modern-day Labour Party.
Well, that's a really good question, because what we've been left with, frankly, I think as a result of this smear operation, is both the main parties and the Lib Dems, in fact, really fighting an election for power with more or less not very dissimilar policies. And I think that is a function of the way...
So do you then vote Green?
I don't know who I'll vote. I might spoil my ballot, to be honest with you. If the political system is not offering a genuine alternative, why should I?
All right. Right, we will hear from Angela in a moment about her coronation experience, briefly. It's 8:47.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 9 minutes to 9. It's that time of the evening where we ask our panel who was at the coronation. Now, Linda, you were at all sorts of different events. I'm not even going to ask you how you blagged all the tickets, but I want to hear from Angela, who was, presumably you were quite sort of front of church, given your elevated position.
Well, I had a great seat for watching the procession come in, which was it's amazing. But you've got people coming in their national costumes from the Commonwealth, from all over the world, and seeing people march through, which was...
That was quite interesting, where you had this Commonwealth procession, and Rishi Sunak was right at the end of it. And I thought, wouldn't he deserve to be sort of
interspersed with the politicians that were taking their seats as well? And I was very close to the choir, and the music was just amazing. So I think that the whole thing was incredible. It was fantastic. There's a sense of sort of slightly bizarre where you are and what's happening, and absolutely wonderful at the same time. So I was sitting in front of the musicians, and many of them had composed pieces for the coronation, and it was the first time they'd heard them played all together. They'd only heard their own parts. Two sort of, I suppose, good points for me was, one, because I had to wear the Lord's robes. I didn't have to worry about what to wear. I didn't have to spend a fortune on a dress or a hat or an outfit. But the other thing was quite funny, that we had to be there quite early, had to wait, and were advised that there were very few toilet facilities available. So I think for some people it was nothing to eat or drink before they arrived. And we were seated by 9. I got in about 8:30.
Cool.
By 9, I was in by 8:30. It started at 11 and we got out around 1.
Really?
Yeah.
I'd still rather watch it on television, I think.
Well, actually, I watched the coronation on TV. Where I was sitting, I couldn't see the actual coronation. And, of course, Gillian Merron, who was from the Labour Party...
What's the point of being there, then?
Because you were part of it, and we saw the procession. Different people saw different parts of the event. So we could see part of the coronation, but not properly. We saw the procession for the whole way. Other people saw other parts of it, because the Abbey is, as you know, the layout of it. Not everybody can see everything. But, I liked that people were mixed up. So in the nave, as people came in, you had people who were celebrities next to charity workers, next to politicians, next to health workers.
Who was next to you?
I was between actually two Liberals, Ed Davey. I had Keir Starmer one along, Ed Davey, and then Dick Newby from the Lords, and the musicians behind me. I could see Andrew Lloyd Webber, when his piece was being played, he was mouthing the words to it as well, because he was probably hearing it for the first time, played in that atmosphere.
Linda, you had the misfortune of being at Windsor for that dreadful concert with acts that nobody had ever heard of, and Lionel Richie.
I rather enjoyed it. It was just I finally found the word I was looking for. It was eclectic.
Eclectic. Yeah. We get you.
But nobody else can do these things, and we'll never see the like of it again.
Right, this is the text question, which I've been gagging to ask, from Danny in Wolverhampton. Is 79 too great an age to become a parent? This is because, this comes on the back of the news, that Hollywood actor Robert De Niro, the one that talks Italian, he has become a father for the 7th time at the age of 79. Tim, I don't know why I'm coming to you first on this.
He doesn't look 79. That's Tim.
Well, I suppose I was children's minister long ago.
That's why I was coming to you, yes.
Well, I'm glad it's Robert De Niro, not a woman, who's giving birth at 79, because I think that could be a bit tricky. But let's look at it. So when the child is celebrating his or her 21st, Robert De Niro will be celebrating his 100th birthday. There can be a limit on the party games he can join in at that age. I think it is probably a bit too old, isn't it? I mean, we seem to have got later and later when people do tend to have children, and now it's mostly into the 30s, and that's a state of when people get married and can afford to settle down, buy a house, blah blah blah. But 79, really? I mean, just think the impact that child is going to have, having a parent who can't go and play.
Only be too knackered to bounce it up and down on his knee, won't he?
Yeah. I mean, he's still got it in him, I have to
clearly.
say, Robert De Niro. But, being a father is quite a big responsibility. So.
Linda?
Well, 70 is probably the new 50. Well, the reason I say that is because longevity actually means that if you were born in, say, the 1970s, you have a 50% chance of living healthily until you're 100. So the only reason I raise that, not because I think De Niro is, I agree, it's going to be quite challenging. It's just that people are actually living longer. And I think we're going to see different kinds of generations, moving forward in terms of age. But
it's interesting you say that, because I was watching on the local news the other night, something about street parties and the coronation, and they were talking about this 102-year-old who was celebrating her birthday that day. And I just heard her speaking. I looked up, and she looked about 65. And I mean, I always think 102-year-olds, they're going to look all gnarled and sort of really old. She didn't at all.
I've got a 102-year-old whose birthday was on Sunday, and I did a dance routine with her. She ran a dance school, and she did an hour's. I did an hour's dance routine with her. At the end of it, in her garage, I was absolutely dripping with sweat. And Dinky Flowers, who is a star, raised money in this sponsored thing, was looking fresh as anything at 102, and she's all with it. Fantastic.
I think it says she's all woman.
I brought her to the House of Commons. She went dancing with the Speaker. She gave him a run for his money as well.
This has taken a turn, hasn't it? Angela?
I'd like to say I was impressed, but it's not about giving birth or father and a child. It's actually about being a parent. Yeah. And I think that's going to be the difficult part. All of us can think of special times for our parents when they took us out somewhere, we played games, we went out for the day, went on holiday. And perhaps his child won't have those same memories, having an older father. On the other hand, I'm told perhaps older fathers, older mothers have more patience. So people do what's right for them, but I'm not sure there are many men who would want to become a father at the age of 79.
Are you one of them, Justin?
I was just going to say, as a dad of young kids, the thought of having another one even now fills me with dread.
Right, let's go to our fun... that was quite a fun question, but our fun question from Roger in South Shields. Catherine Tate is apparently the chosen one who will announce the UK's Eurovision results on Saturday. Who else would your panel like to have seen carry out this important public duty? I'll kick off, shall I? Nigel Farage. Linda?
Hannah Waddington. I just thought she was so funny when she was doing the semis, right?
Well, we can't mention this because they're on at the moment. Tim?
Well, I'm interested to see which character Catherine Tate does. If she does the sweary old granny, that could be a bit of a problem. But obviously, the person she is Penny Mordaunt.
Yes.
The new star. Who knew? She could really give it to the opposition announcing the scores, France, no point.
Actually, the French entry is quite good this year. Justin?
Tim, I'm afraid, once again, I profoundly disagree with you, because the person who should most obviously present it is Iain Dale.
I was going to say that.
What a creep.
Corey has written here, not allowed to say Iain Dale.
You didn't tell me.
What a creep.
Well, I would love to.
Don't invite him back.
I would love to, but I would do it in German rather than French.
Okay. I was going to say Iain Dale, he stole it from me. So you've obviously won on this panel, haven't you?
We agree.
We've had something to agree on.
Well, thank you.
I think Catherine Tate would be fantastic.
Yeah. No, but
wouldn't be my first choice, I have to say, but that's
I don't watch
just carping. Well, I'm sure we all look forward to watching it on Saturday. I certainly do. Thank you very much to all of our panellists, to Tim Loughton, Angela Smith, Linda Yueh, and Justin Schlossberg. We will be back with another cross question. There isn't a bank holiday next week, unusually, is there? So we will have 3 next week. Coming up in the next hour, I want to talk about apprenticeships, because school leavers could join the NHS via apprenticeship schemes in a plan to fix staff shortages. And this isn't just for, shall we say, the professions that you would think of. You're actually going to be able to become a doctor or a nurse without going to university by becoming an apprentice. Now think about that for a moment. It's quite a, as Sir Humphrey might say, a courageous proposal, but does it have legs? But generally, I want to know your experience of apprenticeships, because whenever we talk about this subject, we get a full switchboard of calls almost immediately, because people have very, very strong views, mostly positive, it has to be said. But why don't more people become apprentices?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock, the Archbishop of Canterbury has described the government's controversial migration bill as morally unacceptable as it's debated in the Lords. The draft legislation was passed by MPs last month but is expected to face opposition from peers. Justin Welby has told